Hello, welcome to the sequel to the T guide video that I made not too long ago. This video should be shorter than the last, and we'll go over basic buff and pot timings, basic mitigation with my homegrown healer and tank mitigation plans, alongside some do's, don'ts and cool edgy things you can do, but you shouldn't, as some can be rather grief. If you learn something new, let me know, but don't blame me if you wipe a party trying these tricks. Firstly, I'll go over quickly about the 2-minute buff timings, pot timings and optimal combos for certain jobs, as I see a lot of people do these incorrectly. Firstly, the standard buff timings are P1 opener, P2 start, gavel, after inception, J-waves, P4 opener, during the buster after Fate A, and the second trine. The second trine will be held for a short time until your pot comes off cooldown. Alongside these 2-minute buff timings, the pot timings will be P1 opener, gavel, P4 start, and second trine like I just mentioned. As for 2-target combos, I see a lot of people using the AoE combo when it's a loss. The jobs that should be using AoE are as follows: Gunbreaker, Dark Knight, Scholar and Astro, Dancer's Blood Shower, Red Mage's Impact, and Samurai's Gurren. Machinist's Bioblaster being more potency than Drill on paper, but if a drill crits, direct hits, or even high rolls, then it's a gain of a Bioblaster. Bard's Quick Knock and Rain of Death are huge gains, and finally, Ninja's Katon. Any job not listed here should be using the normal single target combos and abilities. Lastly, I will post a pastebin link to the mitigation plans for all healers and tanks. These are homebrewed for my own playtime and should be more than enough no matter the party and healer comp. Anyways, let's get into the things you can do in Phase 1. Firstly, I'm going to quickly go over the do's and don'ts in Phase 1. This phase can be quite taxing on the healers, so some of these will help immensely. The first thing that should always be done is, during the Yagdoll mechanics, both rage DPS should move close to the middle once the doll is acquired. This way, they will not miss any heals, as missing heals during dolls will pretty much result in a swift death. Luckily, you can't miss mitigation anymore due to the 30 arm increase a few patches ago. The second thing I see a lot of is off tanks not utilising their reprisal. A main tank will often reprisal first cascade and the splashes leading to the second cascade. As an off tank, the best reprisals you can do consist of the fluid swing during Yagdolls and the protein baits during cascade 2. The timing can be very tight, so don't worry too much if you don't get it straight away. Lastly, for the things you should do, is a very simple and self-explanatory one. As a DPS, you should always be watching the HP of both bosses. Recently I've seen many wipes and disbands due to having high damage melees and high cleave ranged, resulting in living liquid to blow up and cause a wipe to hand of pain. DPS, make sure you are always tab targeting and keeping their HP within range. For the don'ts in Phase 1, these only consist of 2 things that I also see a lot of people doing. During drainage, I see a lot of Dark Knights using the Living Dead and having it not proc during the splashes, getting into a low HP and then perishing to the upcoming cascade. Using an Invalid here is next to useless, as constant healing is going out and having extra mit in other places usually doesn't help much. Alongside this, tanks should not be given their core tank mitigation besides a few small things. The opening fluid swing on pull, if an invuln is used during the Yagdoll fluid swing, or Protein 2. Protein 2, the main tank can give their external mit to the off tank as they are taking an extra amount of damage compared to the main tank. With those out of the way, I will now go over the silly random things you can do in Phase 1, starting with the Yagdoll feed. The tornadoes that spawn with Cascade can actually be used as a source for the doll feed. However, you'll most likely not be able to do this in a normal PF, as strats don't really allow you to. However, it can be done. For the second thing you can do, I don't actually have a clip, but the fluid swing buster can both be taken by one tank. In this situation of the main tank dying on Cascade 1 during their invuln, the off tank can take both bosses and mitigate more than usual and survive both swings. The vulnerability you get from said fluid is not lethal, but you will need to mitigate slightly more than usual. Coming to the end of the phase, there's 2 things you can do during Limit Cut. One of them you are also able to do during Wormhole. Firstly, if you know the pattern well enough, you can cross over to the other group at any time, as long as you're doing split strat of course. The easiest numbers to do this on are 1 and 2, but realistically it can be done with any number, as long as you end up on the correct side during your bait. Speaking of bait, as an even number, you will obviously be taking the dash from CC. This dash will knock you back without knockback protection, however, if you face head on with CC, this will not happen, meaning you won't need your anti-knock back, but there is no reason to not use it anyway. There isn't anything else interesting in Phase 1, so let's move to Phase 2. Bridge Chaser and Brute Justice can be a scary phase for a lot of people. Many people panic during this phase and have some very erratic movement causing wipes occasionally. Some things that can make the phase a lot easier, first one being, during the first water stack, the healer in range should give a clear straight path for the healer that needs to place the water. This healer needs to move out of the water as fast as possible and doesn't have a choice but to hold W. Giving them a clear path in front of them allows them to move at free will and not worry about a pesky range stood right in front of them and colliding with their Nisi. Another spacing tip I suggest is melees. Once you have passed or collected your Nisi after the enumerations, you should not be near the right flank. This space is reserved for the healers and water stack that need as much space as possible. Melees should place themselves on the left flank, being mindful of the lightning still. If both melee have Nisi, you can either stand side by side, or one melee can stand max melee, and the other can stand slightly closer, allowing positionals to be gained by both melees. Lastly for spacing, during the Gavel lineup, if supports need to line up first, melees should move out of the water stack enough to evade it, but also let the main tank move themselves and the boss to the lineup. Many times I've had melees walk into me while I'm moving the boss, they collect my Nisi, which is the incorrect colour, and then proceed to blame the tank. Melees, please give the tanks time to move before Usain bolting to your lineup when you don't need to. This is very annoying. With movement out of the way, some small things you can do also. I get a lot of questions of people asking, where do I idle, where do I feint? Is it only Whirlwind? The first and last wind can be mitigated, yes, but is much less of a threat than the water stacks. The water and lightning stack can be mitigated with the targeted mitt on Brute Justice as the debuffs time out, meaning idle, feint and reprisal should all be used on these stacks, prioritizing third water as one to mitigate. These mitts will also help with the tank autos as they hit very hard. Lastly, just a small thing, at the start of the phase, CC should be the main focus for your 2-minute buffs, as he has a time of invulnerability and only has ranges attacking. If you don't want to wipe to a 40% HP difference in rage, then you should be bursting on CC. I'm looking at you ninjas, that mug is always on BJ. Lastly, if you play tank like me, you might fall asleep at the wheel. Spin Crusher, the cornel cleave you're supposed to dodge, is livable. With a hefty amount of mitigation, you can snapshot the hit and move behind to be knocked back into a cheeky kiss with the melees if you're lucky. Phase 3. Not much can be done or said in this phase, snooze fest I know. However, they do have some of the coolest things. First, the do's and don'ts. During Inception, the shared sentence should be given any form of mitigation, whether it be from the tanks or healers. Without a shield or any mitt, the shared sentence player will die a sad death in the tank's arms. Now, fun fact, the 2 busters in Phase 3 have different timings. The first one is quicker and lasts around 8 seconds, while the second buster lasts around 9.5 seconds. Now if you have a paladin, they can sometimes struggle with timing, especially me for whatever reason, because Hallowed Ground's stupid, dumb, awful delay. As a paladin, you can either communicate with your main tank and take the first buster, or if you take the second buster, you can mitigate the chastening heat and invuln a second or 2 later. Just make sure you don't die to the auto attack after the hit. Wormhole is the most iconic mechanic in T, and even though it's a downtime mechanic, I still see people die to damage at the end of this mechanic. Specifically number 7 and 8, as they are last to the middle for the stack marker at the end. They tend to miss heals and perish most of the time, so healers and tanks, be sure to keep an eye out on their health and maybe give them some love if needed. Now 2 things that really annoy me in P3 which I see people do all the time. The 4 orbs in Inception. 2 spawn in the northern half of the arena, which I'll talk about very soon, and the other 2 will spawn in the southern half of the arena. The standard way to resolve this mechanic is to stretch your tether northeast, northwest, with one player moving down once the balls start moving. However, I see specifically one player attached to the southern orb move to the east or west red dot at the start of the mechanic. Doing this could result in a crystal player being hit by the orb or forcing a crystal player to move out of position to dodge and placing the crystal incorrectly. However, if you're attached to one of the north orbs, this is fine. The orb will curve and be out of harm's way of everyone. The last thing that annoys me is during the odd number cleaves in Wormhole, I see a lot of people aiming their cleave on a cardinal, which 90% of the time it murders the entire half of your party, and now 3 out of 8 people are angry at you. Always point this cleave at an intercardinal, or 45 degrees. Once your cleave has happened, do not move, and you're 100% safe from the dash. Finally, the cool things you can do with P3 to make this boring ass phase slightly more fun. Temporal Stasis has by far one of the most coolest tricks you can do. If you have an aggravated assault, there's a tiny safe spot in the middle of the arena, very slightly to the side of Brute Justice, as you can see in the clip. As aggravated is purely a spread debuff, as long as you don't get hit by anything else, you can live. So in this case, as long as you're not close enough to bait CC or BJ, this is technically a safe spot. Please do not do this in a real party. This is purely just for memes. Speaking of aggravated being just a spread mechanic, if you get lost in Inception, which happens a lot, going to the right side of the heart is fine as long as you don't stack with a shared sentence. Do what you want, just don't get hit by anything else. Lastly, the flare thrower baits after the crystal explosions are baited on 3 people. 1 person cannot bait 2, I found this out the hard way. Usually taking 2 flare throwers is death, however on tank you can eat 2 and live. You'll need a minimum of 20% mitigation to live, which usually you will have, so if you're ever late or you don't trust your co-tank, you can pop submit and eat 2 flames. You can take 3 however if you kitchen sink and maybe get a little love from the healer, like shown. That's it for phase 3. Phase 4 is not as exciting as the rest, so this should be pretty quick. Phase 4 is similar to phase 3 in which there is not much you can do, as this phase is very static. However, there's a couple things to note. Firstly, I'm going to quickly go over final word as a whole, as almost every party does this incorrectly. Light Beacon should always be on the northmost wall. On the marker or closer has a very high potential to kill light players marching towards. Dark Beacon, of course, on C, and the remaining 6 players should be on the outside edge of the C marker. Not in between C and 3, not on 3, not in the C marker. The outside edge is where you should be. If you are a dark player and you are any further than C and 3, you are dead. You'll be pushed away too far, and now we go back to P1 because we got spreads first. That's all there is to it really. Fate calibration A and B, there's nothing you should do besides keeping note of the beacon distance requirements. Tanks with 90-second mitigation can use their mit as Perfect Alex disappears for Fate B, and then again at Trine 2 for an extra usage. As for things you shouldn't do, it's very simple. If you cannot greed stillness, do not do it. I'm sure everyone in your party will love you for greeding and sending you straight back to P1 because you're a beacon and killed half the party. Lastly, the stacks in Final Word and Fate Calibration Beta are not to be taken solo or sacrificed. Taking these solo will kill the whole raid, and if you don't die, you will get a 3-minute long damage down, and this is of course not optimal. But the cool tricks is only a couple. Firstly, in Final Word, like I said about greeding stillness, there's a pretty consistent way to greed it. If stillness is second during Final Word, immediately after the Force March, you can get 1 GCD and some OGCDs, such as pulling a card or an Edge of Darkness. However, as soon as you do this, on target instantly, otherwise auto attacks will bite you in the ass. Do not use jumps on Dragoon. Stillness is strictly animation based at the time of the cast bar completion. If you do an ability with a very long animation, you'll most likely die. During stillness for Fate Calibration A, you can perform some actions such as Collective Unconscious, Passage of Arms, Meditate, Enactment, and Tenchi Jin. Just don't use Tenchi Jin during motion, as you are counted as doing nothing. Finally, this is probably the most grief thing you can do in the whole fight, as for some reason, a lot of people never learn this mechanic, but during trines, you can do a 2-to-1 dodge, meaning you have less time to dodge and a very high chance of dying if you don't know how to do it correctly. As you can see in this clip, this can be very malicious and will most likely wipe the whole group. Adding on to this, you could also dodge trines in the northwest quadrant, but if you are targeted with the stack, it's GG and you're dead without an invuln. That's it. That's pretty much every do, don't, and cool trick / tip that's worth noting in T. As of course, will be some things I've missed, which I've either completely forgot or wasn't worth mentioning. I hope this video helped, or you learnt something new. If you did, let me know, and I hope it made getting that totem slightly easier. If you want to see T content, I stream at twitch.tv/QtBakaa. Otherwise, have a good day.